This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and say hello to my new weightlifting tool. This is the Alienware 17R5, the 5th generation, in other words, with Intel 8th generation CPUs inside. Now, this is the super high-end configuration with an Intel Core i9 and an NVIDIA GTX 1080 CPU inside. Lots of RAM, lots of SSD, all that sort of thing. And Alienware, the folks at Alienware have a cute name for the configuration, but I can't share that with you because it's a little bit racy. But suffice to say, it's going to kick some butt, and we're going to look at it now. So like I said, we have pretty much the top of the line configuration, so it's around $3,100. You could go even higher on the display. We have the same QHD, it's 2560 by 1440 TN 120 Hertz panel that Alienware has been offering in the Alienware 17 for some time. You could go up to 4K and actually bring the price up a little bit more. But we have the Intel 8th generation Core i9-8950HK. Now, before you get super duper excited about the idea of a Core i9 in laptop land here for these 45-watt 6-core CPUs is more of a marketing thing at this point, because the Core i9 is really the equivalent of the Core i7 HK CPU from last generation. It's still 6 cores, it's still 45 watts. In other words, the architecture is really not different from a Core i7, it just happens to be the overclockable version of the CPU. Okay, now that that's out of the way, we have an NVIDIA GTX 1080 in here, which is the fastest you can go, and it's overclockable if you want to play with your clocks on your GPU as well. 32 gigs of RAM, which is the maximum DDR4 2666 megahertz RAM. It still has 2 RAM slots inside. We have a NVMe fast boot SSD and a 1 terabyte hard drive. You can get a bunch of different configurations with your SSD and with your hard drive. So that said, if you want an Alienware, you don't have to spend that much money. You can still get a very powerful laptop. The pricing is pretty much the same as the last generation, which means if you want a Core i7, the 8750H, which is your standard Core i7, non-overclockable version, still a very competent CPU with less thermal distraction, shall we say, problems, and a GTX 1070, and a nice fast boot SSD and 16 gigs of RAM, yada yada. And you can still get that for around $1,700 with the 1080p IPS display, which is a 60 Hertz refresh display. Now, it starts at like $13.99, and it's actually not that bad a configuration. You know, the Alienware is owned by Dell, and Dell always starts with a really deconfigured item for the very base item in the listing. But this time it's not that bad. You still get a Core i7, for example. You get that 1080p display, which is certainly competent, and a GTX 1060 at that price. So not too bad, not too slumming. So the cool thing with Intel 8th generation CPUs is core increase. So now the Core i7 as well as the Core i9 have 6 cores instead of the usual 4, still 45 watts. So on average about 20% more CPU and performance. Now for gamers, the GPU is what counts more. You won't find many things that get CPU bound, maybe Civ 6 near end of game, that sort of thing. But for those of you who are using this for content creation of any kind, scientific simulations, the extra performance is welcome. If you do go with that $1,700-ish regular Core i7 with the GTX 1070, you shouldn't have any thermal problems with cooling or anything like that. Now, Dell says that they've reworked the cooling here, and in fact, they have improved the tension arm. For those of you who are geeky and follow such things, they use a tripod heatsink, and the screws didn't have very even pressure to press that heatsink down. So they've improved on that, more fan blades. They say that they've improved the heatsink itself with vapor chamber kind of cooling, but to me it looks like the same heatsink and the same number of heat pipes and the same footprint and all that sort of thing. So it doesn't look that changed to me. For our overclockable model, you definitely want to use the fan profiles that are available in the updated Alienware Command Center, which is now a Windows Store app instead of being a desktop app, and go with higher fan profiles. Speaking of that, also, they have kind of overclocking for dummies there in that application. You can always go into BIOS and do things too, but they have overclock 1, overclock 2, if you want to play with your overclocking without getting too geeky, for those of you who are not so into it. Anyway, like I said, the standard Core i7 model with the 1070 thermally should not be a problem. I've reviewed many of those in the past configurations, and they've been fine. But this overclockable beast with the GTX 1080, you know, you can see some of the thermals on screen while I was gaming, and that was even before overclocking it. And you will see CPU temperatures getting into the upper 90s if you're playing today's most demanding games on Ultra at native resolution too. So keep in mind, we're talking 2K gaming because we have that 2560 by 1440 display. And so for those of you who like to do things like repaste with liquid metal and all that sort of thing, you'll still have something to do here to keep yourself busy. Let's put it that way. In terms of thickness and in weight, nothing has changed here. So you're still talking over an inch thick. It's like 1.18 inches thick, which is 29.9 millimeters. It's thin relative to other giant gaming big chassis laptops. It's not going to be an MSI Stealth kind of laptop, super skinny, obviously. Heavy it is. And the charger is heavy too. Now this depends again on which GPU you get. So we have the high-end 1080 and that requires a 330 watt power supply. That itself weighs as much as a 13-inch Ultrabook. And then you have the laptop itself, which is 4.42 kilograms or 9.74 pounds. So combined, you're talking about carrying a charger and a laptop that weighs almost 13 pounds. It's a lot to carry. And the footprint is really not much smaller than any other big chassis gaming laptop. It's only in the thinness department where it gets that sleeker look. And of course, the kind of aggressive but more mature look. It's also available in Epic Black as well as Epic Silver for your color options now. Ports on the laptop are pretty decent. I mean, they should be. It's a 17-inch chassis, right? So you have the usual Alienware graphics amplifier port. So that's a pretty affordable way to use an external desktop GPU. Not that this really can be improved much with such a thing, but looking down, the road in the future, that's an option, particularly if you think you're going to stay in the Alienware ecosystem because the graphics amplifier port is proprietary to them. But if you want to go with some other solution, it does have Thunderbolt 3, full 4-lane, 40 gigabit per second. That also does USB-C, so that includes being able to use things like the Razer Core sort of device in the future for an external graphics amplifier, or obviously Thunderbolt 3 docks and all that sort of thing. You have killer Ethernet E2400 on here. You have mini DisplayPort 1.2, HDMI 2.0, several USB 3.0 type A ports. It's all pretty good. No SD card slot still, though. I don't know what Alienware has against it. I would like to see that, though, because I know some people might buy this to do things like serious video editing, and SD card slot would be handy. The keyboard is it's unchanged, but I still like it. It's not an island-style chiclet keyboard, but boy, does it feel good. Nice key travel, nice damping, nice stiffness, everything you would want. It seems a little old-fashioned now. It still has zone programmable backlighting instead of per key RGB backlighting. Now, some people go for that. I actually don't usually bother to program each key individually color-wise, but I leave that up to you. There are 4 programmable light zones and 20 color choices, and 13 zones total because the side LED piping, each individual side pipe can be programmed, lid lighting, all that sort of thing. Trackpad I also like, and I have always liked. Very nice, very reliable operation. And I like that it has dedicated clicky buttons too, so no ambiguity as to where you're clicking. They're soft touch buttons. I prefer that. Some people like stiff, some people like soft. They're soft and they're quiet. No mad loud clicking. Alienware says they improved the sound, and I never had any complaints about the sound. It's always been pretty loud, rich, and full, and it once again is loud, rich, and full. You could actually, other than the fan noise getting in the way, sometimes really enjoy the sound effects in gaming, and certainly when it's quiet, which is when it's playing videos and that sort of thing. The CPU and the GPU are not working hard at all. It really is nice to watch movies with this, listening to the soundtrack. So for displays, we have something interesting this time around. We still have the 1080p IPS 60 Hz display. That's the base one, and these are all matte and non-touch. And then we have the TN panel that we have, and the viewing angles are meh, the contrast isn't so good because the black levels aren't so great, but it's a 120 hertz panel, so that's the selling point. That's another place where Alienware is falling a little behind. Now that we're starting to see 144 hertz IPS displays on some of the recent gaming laptops, like the Gigabyte that we just reviewed, the 15X, for example, the MSI Stealth GS65, the thin model, others. So yeah, the 120 hertz and having to live with TN, even if you get a little bit faster response times, just seems eh. And there's a 4K display, which is nice for those of you who want higher resolution because you are using this for content production. What's new is you can have G-Sync on any of those, $50 more on any of those resolutions. If you want G-Sync, you can pay for it. If you'd rather have Optimus, which is switchable graphics so you can save some battery, well, that's important too, especially considering the fact that these can potentially have very long battery life. They have the maximum allowable that you can take on an airplane, a 99 watt-hour battery in there. So battery life on this is actually not trivial. You can go for about 6 hours of productivity work, which is nice stuff. You can see the metrics for our 120 hertz TN panel option, the 2K display on screen here, and yeah, it's the same that they've been using for a while. So taking this apart is actually, well, in part, fairly easy for most common upgrades anyway. So we have the nice metal bottom here. In fact, the whole laptop is cased in metal, and it's, you know, still one of the classiest laptops on the market in terms of casing and materials. Even the screws are like high quality. It's very nice stuff. So you open it up, and Alienware says they've made it a bit easier to service. I'm not so sure how, in what way they mean that, but here's our hard drive. To get in, like I said, for everyday upgrades, that's pretty easy. So here's your spinning hard drive, 2.5 inch. You could swap in a 2.5 inch SSD if you wanted to, or whatever. Your 2 RAM slots here, readily accessible. That's nice too. Our boot M.2 PCIe NVMe SSD is here as a slot for another one, just as always with the Alienware 17. And these are 2280 full height slots, and there's a half height slot as well. Again, same as it's always been. 2 fairly large size fans here, more fan blades than ever, and you can see the cooling solution here. We've got our 3 pipes running over here, and heatsink and all that sort of thing. So if you want to get to the rest of it, what you have to do is unscrew 2 screws from the back end cap, pull the end cap off on the back, and then start removing these screws. I'll give you little markings right here. They're not too hard to find. And remove the hard drive, which isn't too hard to do. It's just a caddy here, undo a screw. Then you can get into the rest of it. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, if you wanted to actually repaste the CPU and GPU. Now again, like I said, beautiful quality chassis here, really very tidy design, all that stuff's nice. But if you're going with the overclockable Core i9 and the GTX 1080, there is a lot of heat going on here. So put your fans on high and be prepared, if you're an enthusiast also, still to probably take off your heat sinks here and do a repaste job if you really want to keep this thing chilling. All right, I know y'all wanted to see what was underneath this cover, didn't you? So you have to remove all of the marked screws over here. You have to remove the SSD because the screw retaining it, well, holds it to the motherboard. You have to remove these screws even if there's no SSD in here. You have to disconnect the Wi-Fi card, which lives under here, so you can get it through here. You have to disconnect your Tron lights and take out your hard drive. Wasn't that fun, boys and girls? So here's what we're left with inside. Here is our battery, 99 watt-hour, nice beefy battery over here. Motherboard, obviously, and here is our cooling solution right here. Nice beefy fans, 3 heat pipes, shared, so the CPU and the GPU are going to, of course, leak heat to each other, but that's pretty typical design. Very few laptops separate those out. So here's our Wi-Fi card, which is actually accessible without removing the cover, this inner cover over here. So that's the Alienware 17R5. It's a heck of a lot of laptop. Yeah, it's thin as ever, relatively speaking, for a big chassis laptop, right? But it's still pretty heavy, so this is not something that you're going to tote around like nothing in your backpack unless you're much more muscular than I am, which you might be. It certainly is fast, but you know, still Alienware folks have not done as much as we would love with the cooling to really, especially for this overclockable model, to keep the temperatures a little bit lower, but it's probably just going to defy physics at this point because making the chassis this thin means there's only so much room for cooling inside. So as always with the Alienware 15 and the 17 models, I personally like the sweet spot with the non-overclockable CPU. I know. How enthusiast am I to be saying that? Not so much, right? But because the heat is better managed. And with the GTX 1070, you've got a real sweet spot of something that really runs with perfectly fine temperatures that you don't have to worry about repasting it and all that sort of thing. I'm Lisa from MobileTechReview. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and thumbs up if you like this vid.